Fuck your rules. I fight for what's right, and sometimes you gotta fight dirty.
Hey there guys, this is Richard, your host, with another marvelous video. Piotr Rasputin is recognizable throughout the X-Men series as the big, friendly Russian man who can turn himself into steel at will, even though Piotr himself often claimed that he wasn't made of steel but made of rage instead. Over the years, he made it very clear that the only thing he wanted was a happy family life. So let's find out together in today's video if Piotr ever ended up getting the happy family life that he always desired. Before we get into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Backstory of Marvel's metallic hero, Colossus. When it comes to Colossus, when you first see him, it's really hard to imagine that this man is the hero that we know him as. Piotr Rasputin was actually born on a collective farm in Russia known as the Ust-Ordinsky Collective. This farm was near Lake Baikal in Serbia, so you can imagine the type of scenic beauty that Piotr was often surrounded by. When you grow up with so much scenic beauty around you, it'll not be a surprise to anyone if you suddenly develop an artistic style for yourself, and this is exactly what Piotr did. Piotr honed his skills as a painter and often spent time drawing the surroundings. Piotr wasn't the only child in the Rasputin family though. He was the middle one of the three siblings. His older brother Mikhail Rasputin, the cosmonaut, and his younger sibling Ilyana Rasputina were both extremely close to Piotr. When Piotr's powers manifested, he was 13. Instead of using his powers for anything else, Piotr used them to help his family out on the farm, showing just how close he was to them. Now, the surname Rasputin might sound familiar to a lot of Knight fans because that was the surname of the fraudulent Gregory Yefimovich Rasputin, the one who called himself the Man of God. He became a court favorite of Tsar Nikolai II by taking advantage of Tsarevich Alexei Nikolaevich Romanov. The latter was sick with hemophilia, which was a weakness that Gregory exploited and rose up the ranks. Owing to the similarity of their surnames, Mr. Sinister, the one who made Madeline Pryor, decided to dig deeper into the bloodline of Colossus after Colossus was recruited by Professor X. But other than that, Peter's life was rather simple. He lived on his farm with his family and used his powers to help his family and other families of the collective. When he was approached by Professor X to become an X-Man and Colossus agreed, he definitely didn't know what he was signing up for. So let's take a deep dive into what exactly he signed up for without even realizing it. Forged in steel, the evolution of Colossus, the humble beginnings. Ilyana, being the young girl that she was venturing out in the fields when she almost got hit by a tractor that was out of control. Luckily for her, her brother Piotr was nearby. He transformed into quite literally the Man of Steel and saved her. Once the two siblings came back home, they saw they had an uninvited guest. That guest was Charles Xavier, better known as Professor X. The professor had shown up to the Rasputin family because he wanted to recruit Piotr for a job. The original team of X-Men was stuck on the sentient island of Krakoa, and the professor needed Piotr to join his new group of X-Men and help save the old group. Piotr, at first, wasn't ready to go out of Russia because of his family. However, he spoke with them and on their insistence and his own morality, Piotr decided to go with Charles Xavier to New York to help him out with his issue. Professor X gave him the codename Colossus and together, the two mutants went back to New York. Once there, Professor X took Piotr and all of his new recruits to go fight the sentient island of Krakoa and save the old group. Once they'd saved the old X-Men though, the majority of that group decided to leave, leaving the new group of X-Men consisting of Wolverine, Thunderbird, Banshee, and Nightcrawler. Piotr decided to live in Westchester County instead of living in the X-Mansion. Here, we see the toll the separation was taking on Piotr because he was a big family man. He struggled to adjust to the American lifestyle, and on top of that, he kept missing family. More often than not, Piotr would be writing letters to his family back in Russia to hopefully make up for the distance between the two. However, as he was now a part of the new X team of X-Men, he had to often train with the rest of the group in the Danger Room, and soon enough, Piotr ended up forming a bond with Wolverine, Nightcrawler, and even Storm. In fact, his relationship with Storm was so close that Storm would refer to him as Little Brother. All the training that the new team had done soon came into play when the team went to battle on Kirok. Eric the Red was controlling Havoc and Polaris, and on top of that, there were Sentinels under the control of Stephen Lang. The fight that ensued because of it was quite brutal, and the whole team eventually had to make their way to Cassidy's Keep, where they had to face off against Black Tom Cassidy and Juggernaut. But wait, that's not all. Soon after the fight at Cassidy's Keep, the heroes had to make their way forward and ended up having their first ever fight against Magneto. After so much turmoil, when the heroes decided to take a well-deserved break by going out on a picnic, they ended up being attacked by Weapon Alpha and Warhawk. After that, Mesmero ended up controlling them for a while before the Beast intervened. However, soon after the heroes got out of the clutches, they ended up having to face off against Magneto and his robot, Nanny. To escape from all of them, the heroes ended up going to Savage Island. There, Colossus ended up saving Neril and her female friend from a T-Rex that was chasing them around. This led to the three of them spending the night together, and unbeknownst to Colossus, he'd fathered a son.
Charles Xavier was born into a world divided.
The beginning of romance and newfound realizations. Being a part of X-Men sure kept Piotr busy. He never really had the chance to go back to Russia and visit his family. This would lead to him mentioning his family even more. Although he ended up forming a close friendship with his teammates, that didn't stop Peter from often offhandedly mentioning how he's the only X-Man who has a real family left. While battling with the Hellfire Club and the White Queen, Peter first met Kitty Pryde, known as Sprite. At first glance, Peter was attracted to Kitty, but he didn't really approach her. On the other hand, Miss Locke decided to hold all the loved ones of X-Men hostage until they figured out a way to save her employer, Arcade, who was taken in by Dr. Doom's robot. One of the many people that Miss Locke had kidnapped was Illyana, Peter's little sister. Understandably, this took a toll on Peter, which led to it being extremely easy for Miss Locke to get in his head. She got in his head, brainwashed him, and turned him into a proletarian. As a proletarian, Peter fought with all the X-Men who struggled to get him out of control. Once he was out of control, together with the X-Men, Colossus was able to save his little sister, Illyana. Once saved, this led to Illyana's decision to stay in the X-Mansion with her brother instead of going home. This decision of hers led to the foundation of her team membership in the New Mutants. A little while after Illyana decided to live in the X-Mansion, she was kidnapped by the demon known as Belasco. This led to the X-Men entering the Limbo in order to save her. Limbo has an odd temporal nature, so this led to Illyana staying in it for years while only days passed for the rest of the X-Men. That's why when Illyana was saved, she was 13, even though when she was kidnapped, she was 6. But this type of intrusion into Limbo was not very good, as an alternate timeline version of Colossus had to die as a result of it. Right after this incident had happened, the evil mutant known as Proteus showed up. Proteus had the power to warp reality completely, and the horrors and atrocities that he wanted to commit were extremely worrying. Now, in order to stop Proteus, one had to kill him off. The only person who was able to take the life of Proteus was Peter. This was because Peter's metal skin had a visceral reaction on Proteus, which was essential to taking him down. So, even though Peter himself wasn't very comfortable with it, Peter punched Proteus, taking his life. This was one of the most horrific and brutal realizations that Peter had to come to terms with. He thought being the hero meant he'd be protecting the whole world from everything else. However, he wasn't expecting to take her life. This took a significant toll on his mental health. While Peter knew he did it to save the lives of several people, especially Dr. Moira McTaggart, he still couldn't come to terms with this incident. But there was something that was rather good in his life. After Dracula was defeated, Lilith released Kitty. This was when the two started to come closer to one another. They started dating after surviving the attack of the alien brood. Love and the problems with it. However, this relationship between Peter and Kitty didn't last long. During the Secret Wars timeline, Peter found himself attracted to the healer known as Zaji. This led to Colossus realizing that his feelings towards Kitty were not genuine, which led him to breaking up with her. The emotional distress of this breakup was quite heavy on Colossus, and he fought with Juggernaut after getting drunk with Wolverine. Later, he learned from dire wraiths mid-fight that owing to the time she spent in Limbo, Illyana was now a sorceress. As Colossus was a very family-oriented guy, this revelation definitely hurt him quite a bit, because how could he not have known of such an important change in his sister's life? But before he could dwell on that, he and the rest of the X-Men had to go fight in the Kulan Garth, with their opponents being the Avengers. Most of the heroes perished there, but thanks to magic and Doctor Strange traveling back in time, this event was wiped away, and it didn't happen. Kitty and Peter came face to face again, and this time they decided to remain friends because it was clear that both of them cared a lot about the other, and that it'd be foolish to try and stay away from each other. This newfound friendship was tested when the pair, along with others like Wolverine, Nightcrawler, Rogue, Psylocke, Magneto, and Storm, were de-aged by Mojo, who also brainwashed them. Luckily, magic was able to clear off that mental control and return the X-Men to their proper age before everything became permanent.
That's right.
Dealing with the Brood threat with the addition of Garruk. Havoc ended up founding a Brood star, Shark, and this piqued the interests of the X-Men, leading them to carry out an investigation. Their investigation led them to Harry Palmer, a guy who was completely unaware of this infection. So, because of that, Harry had unintentionally developed several mutant hosts. This put the X-Men, who were not too keen on killing human hosts, in quite a dilemma. However, when one of them, called Brickbat, tried to kill Colossus, Havoc had to kill him to save Colossus. This led to Colossus killing off another mutant known as whip hand to save Havoc. Eventually, Wolverine killed Harry, which thwarted the entire threat of Brood. Later that night, Storm left without telling anyone anything, which led to everyone being concerned. So the X-Men tracked her down, and they found her in the Savage Land. Once the X-Men arrived there, they came face to face with Garrick, the petrified man who was in the armor of Terminus. During this fight, Longshot, the save of Mojo, whom the X-Men befriended when Mojo had de-aged everyone, was somehow lost. That was when Storm's cameo crystal opened a portal. This portal led to the Umrin's dimension, where Longshot somehow ended up being. Once there, Peter ran into Nareel, and even though he didn't know it, he ended up playing with his son, Peter. Together with the Fall people who were in this dimension and the High Evolutionary, the X-Men were able to separate Garrick from the armor he was wearing, which brought the Savage Land back to its original state as opposed to the scorched and barren land that the X-Men found themselves on. The hell on New York City and the Goblin Queen's arrival. Keeping their rebirth a secret had been going decently well for the X-Men, but they couldn't stay this way for long because soon enough, Havoc ended up finding a trail of the Marauders back in the alley where they'd attacked the Morlocks. The X-Men showed up there, and much to his horror, Colossus found a clone of Riptide. The Marauders decided to flee the moment they saw the X-Men, and as the X-Men followed, they noticed that there was something off about the world that surrounded them. It turns out that there was a demonic invasion happening in New York City, and pretty much everyone who was running about was turning into a demon themselves, including the X-Men. The only person who was seemingly unaffected by this was Colossus himself. Soon enough, Colossus learned that his sister Illyana had lost all control of Limbo, and that was why there were so many demons roaming the New York City streets. He tried to reach out to her, but he couldn't because Sim, the demon that he had fought before, was fighting with this demonic version of his sister. When Illyana, in her dark child form, saw Peter, she was very embarrassed and she teleported away. Colossus assumed that this was the demon's doing, and as they fought, Sim told Colossus that Illyana had become this dark child because of the grief that she faced on losing Colossus, and if Colossus were to guarantee that Sim would get their Limbo to himself, then he'd work on it and immediately return Illyana back to who she used to be. But before this could happen, Darkchild herself had figured out a way to stop the Inferno from happening. She opened up a huge portal using a lot of her energy and started sucking all the demons back into the Limbo. This obviously took a huge toll on her being and threatened her entire existence as a whole. She was glowing extremely bright, and it was hard to even look her way. Before Peter could do anything, Lightchild raised her soul sword and took all the demons back to Limbo, leaving nothing but her armor behind. Peter was absolutely horrified and shocked by the loss of his sister. As he cradled the armor and cried over his little snowflake, he suddenly heard some noise from the armor. Lifting it up, he was shocked to find Illyana's 6-year-old self there. Turns out, even in her dark child form, Illyana was somehow able to save her 6-year-old self, and so when her 13-year-old self disappeared, her original 6-year-old self came back. Now that he was sure that his sister was safe and there were no longer demons roaming about on the city street, Peter decided to go back to his friends, but another horror was awaiting him. Madeline Pryor and Havoc had claimed themselves to be the Goblin Queen and Goblin Prince. This was obviously not good news because immediately after claiming themselves as that, Madeline attempted to sacrifice baby Nathan Summers, her child, with Scott Summers to fulfill Nestor's plans. Maddie captured Jean Grey and created a telekinetic bubble that was impenetrable by both the X-Men and the X-Factor. When Colossus tried to climb the demonic Empire State Building, where Maddie had taken Jean, Havoc attacked them. Madeline tried to kill herself and everyone in the nearby vicinity by committing suicide, but the X-Men and X-Factor protected each other while Jean protected Nathan Summers, leading to it being only Maddie who died. X-Men then found this psychic trail of Mr. Sinister, the one who made Madeline Pryor, and following that, they ended up in the school for gifted youngsters. The Marauders were also there and attacked X-Force and X-Factor, and Mr. Sinister destroyed the school. The battle ended with Scott killing Mr. Sinister with an optic blast, which seemingly happened out of nowhere. Finally, the heroes were given a moment to breathe, and Havoc was understandably extremely heartbroken as he lost the woman he loved. So, on Wolverine's suggestion, Havoc, Scott, Colossus, and he went to a bar to get drunk. While there, the 4 heroes ended up saving the world from an alien invasion as well. A new beginning, but the same old ending. Remember the Siege Perilous that was given to the men by Roma, the Omnipresence? Well, using that Siege Perilous, Peter ended up in New York with no memories of his previous life. There, he decided to start his life off as a painter under the name Peter Nicholas. As he flourished as a painter, he crossed paths with a model. This model was none other than the Morlock leader Callisto. But as Peter didn't know, he accepted her and they got into a relationship. Callisto looked like a model because of Mask's work on her. At one point, both Peter and Callisto were kidnapped by Mask, and there, Peter took on his metallic form to fight with Mask. They were saved by Jean, Forge, and Banshee. All three of them saw Peter and decided that since he was happy and better in his life, they'd not tell him the truth. However, the Shadow King, that is, the psychic entity of the mutant Amal Farouk, dominated Peter a lot. The Shadow King sent Peter to find Stevie Hunter and Charles Xavier because Farouk's physical body was destroyed by Charles Xavier. When Peter showed up in front of Charles to shake off the control that the Shadow King had on him, Charles was forced to destroy the Peter Nikolai persona, and this brought everything back, which led to Peter joining the X-Men again and showing up in the fight of Muir Island. Losing Illyana and the journey as an acolyte. After the whole Inferno incident, Illyana went back to her normal age. So, like the big older brother that he is, Peter thought that the best course of action would be to send Illyana back to live with her parents, away from all the violence and gore that he has to go through as an X-Man. However, that turned out to be the worst idea ever, as their parents were slain and Illyana got kidnapped. Illyana was taken in by the Russian government, who were planning on experimenting on her to bring back her powers and eventually use her to defeat this mutant known as the Soul Skinner. The X-Men, along with Colossus, worked together to get her out of there and keep her safe back in the X-Mansion. When the X-Men traveled to another dimension, they came face to face with Piotr Rasputin, Colossus's older brother. Thinking that the mutant was lost in another dimension, the X-Men brought him back to Earth, not knowing Mikhail had lost all his senses. Once back on Earth, Mikhail ended up becoming the new leader of the Morlocks and decided that he should take all of the new Morlocks with him back to the other dimension. This movement understandably ended up killing a lot of mutants, so even though Mikhail was alive, he was as good as gone. On the other hand, Illyana, the one Colossus had done so much for, ended up contracting the legacy virus. It was a virus specifically engineered to kill all mutants, and it was designed by the madman known as Strife. The loss of his family and the brain damage that resulted in him being in his armored form constantly both took a toll on him, and he reconsidered his position in the X-Men. This led him to becoming one of Magneto's acolytes. Eventually, Colossus recovered from the brain damage, but he decided to stay with the acolytes and hoped that he'd eventually be able to change the extremist ways of the acolytes by using the methods that Charles Xavier had taught him. Not much is known about his life as an acolyte, but at one point, the X-Men came across a file that stated that Colossus helped the acolytes to murder unarmed scientists who were in a Russian space station. Their crime? They ventured a bit too close to Avalon by mistake. Return to lost love. Colossus decided that Magneto's Avalon was no place for him. He wanted to go back home, or some semblance of it, and the one person who he could count on was Kitty Pryde. Kitty Pryde was now a part of the Excalibur team, and that led to Colossus venturing there. However, there he found out that Kitty already had a new boyfriend, and it was Pete Wisdom. Feeling like he had no one left to call his own, Colossus attacked Pete, who had supposedly taken away the last person he could have called his own. However, after the brawl, Colossus accepted that Kitty having a new boyfriend didn't change their friendship, and Colossus ended up becoming a part of the Excalibur team. When the Team Excalibur dissolved, Colossus, Nightcrawler, and Kitty came back to the X-Men, sacrificing himself for the greater good, or so we thought. The return of Colossus to the X-Men group wasn't taken lightly by Wolverine, and understandably so, given that Colossus switched sides on them recently. However, despite all the things considered, Colossus soon started working with his old teammates. But over time, everything was forgotten and forgiven, which we saw as Colossus soon took back his position as the muscle man of the group. The last we saw of Magneto was when Colossus abandoned Avalon. Magneto was left brain dead. However, Magneto returned, waging a war on the X-Men, and that led to the X-Men having a fight against him. As a result of this fight, Magneto ended up on the island of Genosha, which was his very own mutant empire. After the battle with Magneto, Peter was shown to go back to his normal life. He picked up painting again, and it was very obvious from his behavior that he missed his sister very much. That was why when Beast showed up with a cure for the legacy virus, Colossus was extremely shocked. It turns out that Moira McTaggart, the lady whom he saved by killing Proteus, was working on the cure for the legacy virus. She was murdered, and her notes ended up in the Beast's hand. Beast deciphered the notes and was able to make the so-called cure. But there was a catch. The cure would require the first person to use it to die. The cure would then go airborne and save the whole mutant population. Colossus, who had lost his entire family in a really short time, decided that he had nothing to live for and injected himself with the cure when he was alone. His friends found him, and even though they tried to save him, all attempts went to waste as Peter didn't revive. A few weeks after this incident, we see Kitty spreading what seems to be Colossus's ashes on his farmland back in Russia. But this was not the end of Colossus. While the whole of X-Men assumed that their dear friend was dead and got cremated, the reality was far from it. An alien known as Ord had come to Earth to wage a war. The extraterrestrial department under S.H.I.E.L.D., known as SWORD, handled everything everything diplomatically, which led to Ord not waging a war. However, he knew that an Earth mutant would be the reason for the destruction of his world. So he took Colossus's body, revived him, and kept him imprisoned, experimenting on him. During one such experiment, Ord located the legacy virus cure in Colossus. He presented the information to the geneticist Kavita Rao, who worked with Benetech. She used that cure to make a commercial-titled cure for mutated condition. When the X-Men heard about this cure, they realized something fishy must be going on there, which led to them showing up to investigate, where they ended up finding Colossus. It was Kitty who found him, and seeing Kitty, Colossus was able to calm down at first. He aided the X-Men in capturing Ord, and after Ord was in custody, Colossus returned home with his friends. His resurrection came as a shock to pretty much everyone, but mostly to Kitty. That's why, after Colossus came back to the X-Mansion, Kitty remained sorta wary of him, and they both kinda avoided each other. However, this eventually went away, and the two heroes rekindled their relationship. Battle with Hulk. At one point, we get to see Colossus go up against Hulk. This event took place when Hulk came to look for Charles Xavier, as he was part of the Illuminati that exiled Hulk from Earth. To save the Professor, Colossus fought with Hulk. As the show of strength went on, at first they were quite equally matched. Hulk even mentioned how, on any other day, Colossus would have been a very worthy opponent for him. However, as this fight was more about a definite winner, Hulk pushed forward and twisted Colossus's arms backwards and broke them in half. In order to fix them, Beast used a laser to heat the metal up while Strong Guy pushed the arms back in place. This was done to prevent any type of serious injury in Colossus's human form. The return of the loved ones. As we know, Illyana fell victim to the legacy virus, but unbeknownst to all, Illyana was resurrected by Belasco, who had used only a tiny part of her soul. This led to Illyana being extremely adamant about earning her freedom. When she came across the new X-Men, she used them to gain her freedom to a certain degree. She stayed with them in San Francisco, even though she wasn't very confident about staying there with them. She eventually reunited with her brother, and that played quite a role in her staying back. Her return showed us another side of Colossus, who was extremely overprotective of her, completely disregarding the fact that she was no longer the same, owing to only having a part of her soul. On the other hand, the X-Men had already decided on their nation, Utopia, and Magneto wanted to be a part of it. Obviously, no one believed him. So, to gain everyone's trust, Magneto used his powers to bring back the bullet that Kitty was stuck in back on Earth. This was obviously a rather stressful event for Magneto, but he was willing to do whatever it took, even if it meant he'd be going to Utopia. When Kitty returned, she was stuck in her phase form for a while, but it was evident that her return was very important to Colossus. The Break World and its drama. The Break World had a leader known as Kroon. During his fight as a distraction, Colossus ended up tearing off Kroon's arm. This was the event that the Break Worlders brought up to Agent Brand while they requested a meeting with Colossus. As Colossus tore off Kroon's arm, Colossus was now the leader of the Break World, and that's why the Break Worlders were not listening to the rule of sword, and it had gone to shambles. So, Agent Brand called up the X-Men for help. After hearing everything the Orders had to say, Colossus gave them a safe space in Utopia. However, soon after getting there, Kroon managed to get the pieces of the bullet Kitty that were trapped in Magneto. Using the X-Club labs, Kroon was able to make a serum out of the bullet pieces that would be able to depower mutants. He used this serum on Magneto and Madison Jeffries first. Once he was sure it worked, he attacked Kitty and Colossus with the serum. Using the serum on Colossus, Kroon prevented Colossus from turning back and then stabbed him with one of the bullet pieces that he had. Then we see Kroon's partner, Helena, slit Kitty's throat with another one of those bullet pieces. The next time we saw Kitty, she was able to talk, and she was bringing Colossus a medkit. While she focused on Colossus, Wolverine took on Kroon. Kroon threatened to come after Kitty when Kitty revealed that there were so many other people waiting to fight with him. Seeing her team waiting, Kroon used a smoke bomb to get away from there. He followed Kitty into the X-Club labs and found Helena's body. Turns out, Helena had given her life and used her life force to bring Kitty back to life. Seeing his partner like that, Kroon decided to let go of revenge and instead used the technology from his homeland to bring Helena back to life using one of his own life force, as she did for Kitty. After this, we see Kitty and Colossus enjoying a sunset together. The Phoenix 5. Phoenix Force is one of the most elemental forces present in the Marvel Universe, and as we know, in the mutant community, the Phoenix Force is cherished quite a bit because of the immense power it brings. However, for the rest of the world, that wasn't the case. So, when the world was informed of the Phoenix Force arriving, and the host of the Force being Hope Summers, things became rather tense between the Avengers and the X-Men. The X-Men wanted Hope to be the one to take on the Phoenix Force as she was the host, while the Avengers didn't want the Phoenix Force to enter Hope at all. The fight pulled Colossus into it as well, and he ended up fighting fighting with Red Hulk, better known as Rulk. Now, Rulk and his fight was going rather well, and they were matching each other, punch for punch, but when Rulk pushed his thumbs into Colossus's eyes, Colossus ended up losing his mind and becoming Juggernaut for a second. This led to him going completely haywire on Rulk, and in the midst of this fight, Colossus ended up damaging one of the pillars that kept Utopia steady. This brought him back to his senses, and Colossus asked Rulk to hit him harder so that he wouldn't lose himself like this. Rulk understood the assignment and punched Colossus hard enough to knock him out. After this, the X-Men appeared to surrender, but that was actually a 3D chess move done by Cyclops, and the moment all X-Men did the same, they all teleported out of there. When Cyclops learned that Hulk was going to the moon with Wolverine to get the Phoenix Force there, Cyclops took Emma, Namor, and the Rasputin siblings with him to the moon. There, a fight broke out between the Avengers and the X-Men again when Thor fell from the skies, with the Phoenix Force closely following him. Iron Man used his weapon to destroy the Phoenix Force, but instead of destroying it, he ended up breaking it into 5 pieces, and each of these 5 pieces entered the X-Men, including Colossus and Magik, turning them into the Phoenix 5. The Phoenix 5 took Hope with them and decided to prepare her for the Phoenix Force eventually. Once back on Earth, the Phoenix 5 actively did everything that they could to make the world a better place to live in, such as providing people with pure drinking water, free energy, and whatnot. Even though the Phoenix Force is the one force that leads to all creations, this was not a hard thing to achieve. At one point, Colossus decided to go to Crimson Cosmos and pay Cyttorak a visit. Colossus tried to explain to Cyttorak that he could no longer be one of Cyttorak's avatars, aka the Juggernaut, because he had a piece of the Phoenix Force in him. However, this didn't change Cyttorak in the slightest. Instead, Cyttorak was glad because, as a hero, Colossus was bringing much more chaos than Cain Marko ever did, because Cain always steered clear of the heroes. Basically, Colossus was Cyttorak's favorite avatar, and he didn't want to let Colossus go. As far as the Phoenix Force was concerned, owing to the rebirth and death cycle the Force went through, it was not incompatible with Colossus. Hearing Cyttorak's words, Colossus decided to use his own powers to push the demon out of him. However, as Cyttorak was in his own realm, his powers were far superior to Colossus's, and he teleported Colossus back to Earth. Namor was one of the Phoenix 5, and when he lost his shard of the Phoenix Force, it went to the other 4, which included the Rasputin siblings. With this extra power, the siblings went against the Avengers, who had come to infiltrate the X-Men prison and take out their fellow friends who were locked away. Spider-Man was the one who stayed behind to buy his teammates some time to get everyone out. Spider-Man was obviously not a match for the Phoenix Force, and things were not looking too good for him. Colossus, despite being extremely powerful, didn't want to go hard on Spider-Man because he didn't want to kill him. On the other hand, Magik repeatedly egged him on, asking him to finish the job. These types of things that Magik said made Colossus think that she'd lost her mind completely, and using this to his advantage, Spider-Man made the two siblings fight one another. As they fought, their Phoenix Force pieces were expelled and entered Emma and Cyclops, the remaining members of the Phoenix 5. Using this power exchange as a distraction, the siblings escaped. Once they were far away, Colossus broke down. He thought Phoenix Force would help him get over the whispers and the malice that Cyttorak had been infusing him with, but despite having the Phoenix Force in him, Colossus lost control and he felt like a monster. To his surprise, Magik gleefully agreed to whatever he said, and it turned out that Magik knew Colossus would have taken her place in the Crimson Cosmos, and he wanted Colossus to feel this guilt and regret. This made Colossus lose his temper again and become the demonic form of Juggernaut that he hated so much. But before he could do anything, Magik disappeared through a portal. Later, when Colossus was in the remains of a farm in Serbia, he was approached by Magik again. Seeing her, Colossus got angry, and his demonic Juggernaut form came out again. Magik lured him into a portal, and then Colossus lost consciousness. When he woke up, he found out that he was no longer the avatar of Cyttorak. This was because Magik was the Queen of Limbo, and in her realm, she was the most powerful. So, by taking Colossus to Limbo in his demonic Juggernaut form, Magik was able to use her soul sword to set him free. This made Colossus realize that Magik could have done this anytime she wanted, but instead, she chose not to. So, before leaving and parting ways with her, Colossus warned her that the next time he'd see her would be the last time she'd be alive. This betrayal from Magik broke him completely, and Colossus hid out in a cave. There, he made small effigies of Magik, which he would destroy, hoping this would make him feel better, but nothing did. Colossus was found this way by Magneto. At first, Magneto wanted Colossus to be a part of his team, but when he realized that Colossus's soul was completely broken, Magneto contacted Storm about his whereabouts and left, becoming the Horseman for Apocalypse. Peter wanted to retire, and so he did exactly that. He went back to Russia, where he had a grand old time tending to the farms and leading a simple life. However, this peace was disrupted when Illyana showed up. Illyana wanted him to come back and join the X-Men team because there were a lot of refugees at X-Haven because of the Mpox breakout, and they could really use some help. Colossus accepted and joined the X-Men team again. There, he ended up with 4 pupils under his tutelage when Storm tracked 600 mutant signatures out of nowhere in a warehouse in Tokyo. radio. She sent Colossus with the 4 mutants to go and investigate. What they found out truly shocked them. Turns out, Sugarman, this mutant from Earth 295, had genetically engineered 600 mutants, which he was going to take with him to the future. Why? Because in the future, the Terrigen Mist will no longer be present, and these mutants will not suffer from the life-threatening M-Pox. This plan was obviously thwarted by the X-Men showing up, and chaos ensued. Amidst this chaos, the X-Men ended up with Sugarman in the future, as well as his mutant embryos. Once they arrived in the Omega world, the Horsemen of Apocalypse attacked them. Colossus, being the senior of the group, asked his teammates to run away while he'd hold the Horsemen back. This resulted in him becoming the Horseman of the War. Being one of the 4 Horsemen of Apocalypse, Colossus spent the next year hunting down young X-Men and bringing Sugarman's arc of 600 mutants to Apocalypse. When the X-Men came to Apocalypse's kingdom to get the arc back, they came across Colossus as well. Illyana knocked Colossus out and took him to the past. However, before she succeeded in doing so, Apocalypse showed up and teleported Colossus away. He transported him away to the clan Akaba, where Colossus stayed until the X-Men found him again. Even though they brought Colossus back, he was still not the Piotr Rasputin they knew. So Nightcrawler ended up bringing Apocalypse and tricked him into turning Colossus back into himself. Living in Krakoa. As we know, Charles Xavier eventually created a mutant nation on the island of Krakoa. Once the island was established, several mutants moved there, and Colossus was one of them. Once a part of Krakoa, Colossus decided to join the rescue missions that the Krakoan government was conducting to save mutants. One such mission was to Russia, and Colossus went there. There, Colossus was beaten by the Russian anti-mutant forces, and the beating was quite severe. With all the things that had happened to him over the years, this was the last straw for Colossus. He decided that he wanted a peaceful life only, and the best way to ensure he got that was by not being around the mainland of Krakoa. That was exactly what he did. He moved from the Krakoa mainland and shifted to Savage Land, where he focused on growing Krakoan medicinal plants. Colossus wanted to have a peaceful life, but Domino came to him with an offer. But when Colossus was fleeing with Cable and his team, he ended up having a passionate encounter with Domino. So, because of that past, when Domino asked him to join the newly formed X-Force and go on a mission with her, Colossus would not reject it. However, the mission ended up being quite traumatic for Colossus. On the mission, Domino was brutally killed in front of him, and that affected his psyche quite a bit. Now, on Krakoa, there were 5 mutants who could perform a resurrection ritual once they joined their powers together. So, the 5 was able to bring Domino back to life. However, the violence from that mission left a lasting effect on Colossus, and Colossus no longer wanted a part in this violent lifestyle. Domino offered him to go on missions several times, but each time, Colossus declined because he wanted nothing to do with all of this. He dedicated his life to farming and growing medicinal plants because all he wanted was a peaceful life. He even started a relationship with Kayla, this mutant who had the ability to manipulate water. Together, they made quite a nice farming couple, but peace was never something that Colossus could have. Mikhail, his brother, who had gone quite crazy, as we've mentioned before, decided to join the Russian anti-mutant organization called Xeno. The Russian government and the anti-mutant organization were very much against the development and existence of Krakoa. So, to take the land down, they needed an inside mole, and thus Mikhail used the powers of Chronicler, this mutant who had the ability to coerce someone's actions by changing the reality surrounding him to turn Peter into that mole. Peter became the mole, and he never knew. He stayed this way, leaking crucial inside information to Mikhail and his team. When his girlfriend Kayla found out, Mikhail influenced him to snap her neck, killing her. Now, nobody other than Kayla knew that Colossus's will was compromised and no longer his own. So, when Jean Grey left the Krakoa Council, known as the Quiet Council, to reform X-Men, Colossus was voted to be a part of the council by Magneto and Charles Xavier, further putting life in Krakoa in serious jeopardy. From page to screen, the cinematic evolution of Marvel's iconic character. Now, that long story about Colossus's life that we just went through was how his life played out in the comic book panels. Given the type of fan following Peter garnered, it honestly would have been a sin not to have him on the on-screen adaptations of our beloved comics. So, as a matter of fact, we do get to see our metallic hero on screen in several movies throughout the X-Men franchise and even Deadpool. So, let's first look at the Colossus we get to see and follow around in the X-Men movie franchise. In the first X-Men movie, we see Colossus painting in the garden. He's not in his metallic form, so it can be a little confusing for first-time viewers. However, in the second X-Men movie, titled X2, X-Men United, Colossus plays a bigger role. This time, instead of a cameo, Colossus plays a huge role in the movie. When Weapon X and William Stryker's personnel attacked the X-Mansion, they came across Siren. Siren's scream incapacitated the intruders and alerted the mutant children about the danger. This led to a lot of children running about, trying to escape the capture, while Logan worked to prevent them from getting hurt. Colossus fought with 2 of them by turning his body metallic and offering his help to Logan. However, on Logan's suggestion, Colossus instead focused on guiding the children out of the X-Mansion using a secret passage with the help of Iceman, Rogue, and Pyro, letting Logan deal with the intruders. After the showdown near Alkali Lake, we saw Colossus come back to the X-Mansion with the others. By the time X-Men Last Stand took place, Colossus was already a part of the X-Men team. We saw them all training together in the Danger Room, where the students had to deal with simulated dangers to make it easier for them to deal with on-field problems. In these scenes, we saw Colossus working with Rogue. When rocks were hurled their way, Colossus turned his body into metal and then touched Rogue's head to save her from any head injury while he protected her body with his. In this scene, we also got to see Logan teach Colossus how to use his teammates as a weapon when Logan asked Colossus to hurl him towards the oncoming enemy, which was a Sentinel. Colossus threw Logan at the Sentinel, even though Storm wasn't very fond of the idea. But this plan worked, and Logan complimented Colossus on his throw. The next we saw Colossus was during Charles Xavier's funeral. While Storm gave the eulogy about the Professor, Colossus was in the crowd, sitting next to his friends, grieving the loss. Later, we saw him helping redecorate the X-Mansion by carrying a TV. He saw Rogue rush away somewhere, and after informing Iceman about it, Colossus went his way. In the movie, as we know, eventually the President failed to stop Magneto, which led to the X-Men deciding to go and face off against Magneto and his Brotherhood of Mutants on their own. Colossus was one of the 6 X-Men who joined in on the action and went up against Magneto and his Brotherhood of Mutants. The X-Men knew they were outnumbered, but if they didn't do anything, they'd end up putting a lot of people in danger, which was something they didn't want to do at all. With that, the 6 X-Men boarded the Blackbird and went to Alcatraz Island, where the showdown happened. Throughout the fight that ensued, we got to see Colossus kick some ass, and it was honestly such a cool fight scene. One tidbit about the Colossus of this movie is that during the novelization of the movie, Colossus and Shadowcat were seen to be together in a relationship. However, Shadowcat had feelings for someone else, which led to her breaking up with Colossus. In all 3 films, Colossus is played by Daniel Cudmore, who didn't give Colossus a signature Russian accent. We saw Daniel return as the metallic hero in the X-Men, Days of Future Past. We saw that Colossus was one of the very few surviving X-Men fighting for his life to hold down the ground in Moscow from the Sentinel attacks. He and his teammates did this to buy Kitty Pryde some more time, as she'd sent Bishop's consciousness to the past. If Kitty succeeded in her mission, then the event in Moscow wouldn't happen. While Kitty was doing her work, Colossus had to fight off Sentinels with Warpath, Blink, Sunspot, and Iceman. At first, the hero seemed to be faring well. Even when a Sentinel was able to damage Colossus, Warpath and Blink served as a distraction enough, allowing Colossus to fix himself, which allowed him to rain hell upon the Sentinels. However, as we know, the Sentinels of the Days of Future Past were rather modern and had technologies that we didn't think they had, and soon enough, we saw one of the Sentinels copy Colossus's power of organic steel flesh and use it against him. The Sentinel ripped off his hand and used that to beat Colossus to his death. However, Kitty was able to complete her mission in the past, and hence this horrific death of Colossus that we saw didn't happen. The next time we saw Colossus, he was seen in China. He was there with his team, who were planning on sending Wolverine's consciousness back to his 1973 body so that he could do things in the right way that would make their present better. While Kitty decided to go with Wolverine's consciousness and held it in the past for as long as she needed for him to complete his mission, Peter was seen working on the approaching Sentinels, who were willing to attack them in the monastery they were hiding at. Warpath detected 12 Sentinels that were incoming, and to stop the Sentinels, all of the X-Men came back to their feet. Storm created a huge thunderstorm, and using that as a cover, Magneto hurled the X-Jet towards the Sentinels. Then Storm used her lightning bolt to destroy the jet, basically turning it into a bomb. While that took care of a few Sentinels, the X-Men now had debris of Sentinels and the jet falling their way. Colossus turned his body into steel to protect himself, but Magneto ended up getting pierced by shrapnel. On top of that, using one moment's distraction, Storm was stabbed by a Sentinel. This led to the remaining X-Men doing their best to fight off the Sentinels that were still incoming. Blink used Colossus as an incoming cannonball by using a portal to send him into the sky. While this gave Colossus enough momentum to punch through a Sentinel, what no one was expecting was for Colossus to be ripped in half while in his steel form by a Sentinel who jumped out of the way of Colossus's punch. Luckily, this brutal kill wasn't the last we saw of him in the original X-Men movies, because when the timeline was reset properly, Wolverine woke up to find Colossus alive, just like several of the dead heroes. But that doesn't mean that was the last time we saw Colossus on screen. In fact, the next time we saw Colossus on screen, it was in the Deadpool movies. As we know, Wade became a mutate, and his healing abilities were very similar to that of mutants. So given that Deadpool's powers were very much like that of a mutant, Colossus, played by Stefan, decided that it'd be great if Deadpool were a part of the X-Men. When Colossus saw Deadpool and the mayhem he caused while trying to ambush Ajax on television, he decided this would be a perfect opportunity to approach Deadpool to become a part of the X-Men. So he approached Deadpool with his student Negasonic Teenage Warhead. When he showed up to where Deadpool was about to kill Ajax. Not once Wanting a hero to do such heinous deeds, Colossus tried to talk Deadpool out of killing Ajax. Using this as a distraction, Ajax ran away, which led to Deadpool attacking Colossus. As this Colossus was more than 7 feet tall, in no time, this Colossus was able to overcome Deadpool's attack. Deadpool ended up with all of his limbs broken, and to take him in, Colossus cuffed Deadpool to him. However, as we all know, in one of the most iconic scenes of the movie, Deadpool escaped from the cuff by cutting off his entire arm. But Deadpool ended up approaching Colossus and Negasonic Teenage Warhead when Vanessa Carlyle was taken hostage by Ajax. In this face-off, Colossus fought with Angel Dust and almost died in a hand because he was being chivalrous. However, Negasonic Teenage Warhead showed up just in time and saved Colossus from the explosive powers of Angel Dust. Once the explosion had settled, Colossus focused back on Deadpool, who was planning to kill off Ajax. Colossus went on a very passionate soliloquy about what a hero should behave like and what the virtues of being a hero are. But much to his horror, Deadpool shot Ajax in the head. Obviously, this disgusted Colossus, but Deadpool promised him that in the future he'd make it a point to behave in a more heroic way. But the reality of promise was shown in the movie Deadpool 2. As we know in this movie, Deadpool decided to finally accept everything that Colossus had asked him to do, and accepted to become an X-Men trainee. This led to him being called in to calm down a mutant along with Negasonic Teenage Warhead and Colossus. This mutant was Russell Collins, who lived in the Essex House of Mutant Rehabilitation. He'd gone berserk and was lighting pretty much everything on fire. This whole discourse was being broadcast on live television, so when the X-Men showed up with Deadpool in the trainee X-Men uniform, this was noted by the public. Deadpool managed to calm Rusty down and stopped him from attacking everyone around him. But when Deadpool noticed that the people from this house had been abusing the kid, Deadpool did what any hero should have done and shot the helpers from the Essex House. As he did it on live television while wearing the X-Men trainee uniform, this disappointed Colossus a lot. Not only did Deadpool break his promise of being more heroic, even though in my opinion Deadpool was right, but also because by doing this, Deadpool unintentionally caused more trouble in the mutant-human relationship, which, as we know, was never good. It also affected the reputation of the X-Men as a whole, as Deadpool was clearly associated with them. So overall, this was a terrible situation, and Colossus was the one bearing the brunt of the blow. This led to Deadpool asking Colossus for forgiveness by blasting a song under Colossus's windows. Eventually, he came around to it and decided to help him. Colossus showed up with Negasonic Teenage Warhead and Yukio to help Deadpool stop Juggernaut and Russell. While Deadpool and others dealt with Russell, Colossus worked on dealing with Juggernaut. The two clashed, and as their powers were on a similar level, no one was going down easily. Finally, Colossus resorted to dirty playing, and with help from Negasonic and Yukio, he was able to drop Juggernaut into a pool where he got electrocuted. The ending of Deadpool 2 was quite good for Colossus because, well, at least this time around, he wasn't horrified by someone's death. The last we heard of Colossus in regard to the X-Men cinematic timeline was when we watched the movie Logan. In Logan, we learned that Charles Xavier ended up with Alzheimer's, and this led to him having a seizure that was strong enough to hurt over 600 people and kill several of the original X-Men members. We're not given any confirmation about Colossus and his health until 2029 when we see Laura, the X-23, read a comic book about X-Men where it's mentioned that Colossus is a member of the X-Men, and he, along with Wolverine, Cyclops, Storm, Rogue, and Charles Xavier, are looking for a place called Eden. With that, we come to an end of Colossus's journey through the movies over the years, but that doesn't mean it's the end of his journey though. Colossus in motion, tracing the mutant Marvel's impact across numerous animated series. Colossus has also shown up several times as a part of the X-Men animated series. Fans would know that over the years, there have been several animated series surrounding our favourite mutants, and given the big role that Colossus plays overall, it's no surprise that Colossus is in the animated TV series as well. The first ever TV appearance of Colossus wasn't in any animated X-Men series, but actually in Spider-Man and His Friends, which aired in 1981. Here, voiced by John Stevenson, Colossus showed up in the episode titled The X-Men Adventure. In this episode, Spider-Man and Firestar were both in the X-Mansion, doing a practice session in the Danger Room. While they were busy there, villain Cyberiad showed up because he wanted to take revenge on Firestar. This led to all the X-Men mobilizing immediately to help Firestar, and Colossus was one of the X-Men who played a crucial role in the fight. The villain divided the team with his machines and took the team to the Danger Room where, thanks to Cyberiad's powers, a holographic Nightcrawler was made who successfully distracted the team. The shenanigans of this episode were quite interesting, and it was fun seeing the character of Colossus like this in the animated series focused on Spider-Man. The cameo was done because this episode was going to be the gateway to a series regarding the X-Men, where Colossus would be the hero. 8 years later, in 1989, we got to see Colossus in the animated series called X-Men: The Pride of the X-Men. Here, Colossus was one of the X-Men who had fought against a brotherhood of evil terrorists. He was sent to be on a Danger Room mission, and he also went up against Juggernaut when the X-Men were tasked to retrieve the power circuit. This Colossus was voiced by Dan Gilvezan, who was actually the voice actor for Spider-Man in the Spider-Man and His his Friends animated series. In 1992, we saw Colossus in 2 episodes of the X-Men animated series. The 2 episodes he showed up in were titled The Unstoppable Juggernaut and The Red Dawn, where Colossus was voiced by Rick Bennett and Robert Culp, respectively. In the animated series, Colossus worked at a construction site as a manual laborer, but the rest of his crew didn't like him. Owing to his size and his demeanor, when Wolverine and Jubilee saw him, they assumed he was the one who had destroyed a building. The 2 X-Men saved Colossus from the construction workers and had a chat with him. It turns out that Colossus was working there to earn money that he could send back to his family. As Wolverine had visited the wreckage before, he knew the scent of the perpetrator. As Colossus' scent didn't match that of the perpetrator, Wolverine decided to let him go. However, Colossus ended up getting jailed soon enough when he went to submit a paycheck. He was taken into custody under the suspicion of robbing a bank, but as we know, Colossus was innocent. This type of harassment led Colossus to wonder who the actual perpetrator was. And what do you know? Finally, the perpetrator turned out to be Juggernaut. Juggernaut was the one who had broken the building and robbed the bank. Later, we saw Colossus come to aid the X-Men when his village was under attack from a Cold War-era super soldier called Omega Red, who was also a mutant. In the X-Men Evolution that came out in 2000, Colossus was one of Magneto's acolytes. Magneto would threaten to hurt Colossus' family, which led to his joining. Once Magneto disappeared, Colossus went back to his house in Russia, and we saw him again when the X-Men were facing off against Apocalypse. Here, we also saw him work with Shadowcat, hinting at the relationship that these two would eventually share in the comic. Later in the series, when Professor X looked into the future, he saw that Colossus would become a part of the X-Men team. This unwilling acolyte of Magneto was voiced by Michael Adamthwaite. In the Wolverine and the X-Men series that came out in 2009, we saw Colossus only in a flashback of episode 1. In the flashback, he was seen in the Danger Room training with Shadowcat and Nightcrawler. In this series, the X-Men had disbanded after Jean Grey's disappearance, which was why Colossus wasn't physically with them. Later, as the series progressed, we learned that Colossus was asked to rejoin the X-Men, but he refused as he didn't want to leave his family behind again. At one point in the series, Mystique transformed herself completely into Colossus. This Colossus was voiced by Phil Morris. Before this series was cancelled, there was news that Colossus and his sister Magic were going to join the X-Men team together. In the Superhero Squad, we see a quick cameo of Colossus, who was voiced by Tom Kenny. Colossus also made an appearance in the Marvel anime X-Men, where he didn't speak. In the Marvel Disc Wars, the Avengers series, Colossus showed up as a member of the X-Men squad. In the Japanese version of the show, he was voiced by Takahiro Fujimoto, while in the English version, he was voiced by Neil Kaplan. With this, we finally come to an end of all of the TV adaptations that Colossus has been in over the years. I think Colossus definitely led quite an interesting life on screen and in the comic book panels. What do you think?
Get him, Tiger! Big CGI fight coming up!
Marvelous verdict. When it comes to the metallic mutant, I have to admit, when I first saw him in the first 2 X-Men series, he didn't capture my eyes that much. But as his lore and personality were explored throughout the different movies and I got to learn more about him, he quickly became one of my favorite characters. Whether it's in the X-Men series or in the Deadpool movie franchise, there's something so satisfying about seeing Colossus go up against Juggernaut and defeat him that I honestly can't explain in words. Let us know down below what you like about Colossus and why or why not he's your favorite character. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.